And Kazel, I'm turning it over to you.
Awesome, thank you. All right, well, welcome everyone, and thanks for joining in. I am now in Auckland. Normally I'm in Tauranga, so I've come up for the long weekend, and I think that's just brilliant things about this mobile classroom is I can truly take it wherever I am, and you can get it wherever you are. So I just love that. So we've been running these for a few weeks now. Started during level 4 lockdown. Popularity of this has grown a lot, and at first we were getting a few questions and I could answer everything really in detail, and now we're starting to get a lot more people interested in this, and there's a lot more questions are coming through. So I've prepared the PowerPoint. What I don't want to do is I don't want to answer the questions too briefly. So your questions are really important to me, and I want to give them, the best go I can to really address them. But having said that, there's a lot. So I would rather hold some questions and answer them next week than feel like I didn't do a great job of addressing it. So if your question's not picked up during the session, and you don't have time to ask it at the end, then there's always another one coming up, and we'll just try and get everybody's needs met that way. All right, so we've had this question before in the previous classes. It comes up every time, and it's a really important question about the seasonal stuff. What can you plant now? And this is such an important question. It keeps coming up and up, and it's worth answering it over and over. So what can I plant in my zone in winter is really important. Some of the questions included, when is it too early in winter to begin growing some of the spring vegetables? So we're planning ahead at this point. What vegetables should I be growing through winter? What is the best start for planting winter crops? What can I cultivate in winter in an area with frost? So that these are really typical of the questions that we get in all the time. So the link that you see at the top of that slide is one of my preferred websites. It's a New Zealand-based website. It's free. They also have a newsletter that you can subscribe to. Before we go and show you what that website does, I just want to talk about the rest of the slide. If you're in a zone that has frosts, you can plant quite a lot of stuff. You could put in brassicas and you can hold them, and the frost won't kill the plants. But when it's that cold, they don't actively grow. So what the really depths of winter is for vegetable growing, for a lot of these plants, it's just a time when they just hold. They get to a certain point in that autumn or the warm winter days, and we still have, if you've got really nice, crisp, warm winter days, then the vegetables will grow. But then when it's cold, that growth just stops. They're not necessarily dying or going backwards. So it's about kind of just sustaining them through that really cold time, and then as soon as the temperatures pick up and the day lengths start getting a little bit longer, boof, away you go. You'll get a lot of production. One of the best winter crops to grow is the whole family of brassicas. They really do well. So brassicas are anything: cabbage, cauliflower, kale. Trying to think of some others. I think even cabbage, cauliflower, kale, broccoli. Those are the main brassica family plants. I think turnips might even count. So these are pretty tough. Other plants that do really well in the winter time are broad beans, and you can eat the leaves of broad beans as well as the pods. So you might not get the pods until late spring, but you'll be able to eat the leaves as a green. So Catherine, if you could put up if you could go to the Garden Grow website, and I'll show everybody what's so good about it. The website, you choose your climate zone. So you start off and you say, well, am I temperate, or am I subtropical or cool mountain? I think are your options. So if you're getting frost, you would say that you're in the cool mountain. If you're up north, you would say that you're subtropical, and sort of the middle of New Zealand would be a temperate climate. Auckland would be considered somewhere between temperate and subtropical. And I'm pretty sure there's a map that can help you do that anyway. You can find it if you don't already know. So once you've figured out what your zone is, then you can go to the month, and it will tell you the kinds of vegetables that you can be planting this month, and it will tell you whether you should be putting them in as seedlings or do you plant them directly. And then when you get to looking at more details on each plant, it will tell you exactly the kind of conditions it needs and how long it takes from planting to reach maturity, so you can really plan your harvest and stagger those plantings and make sure that you've got an even harvest throughout the growing season. So this is a website that really helps answer so many of these questions about what should I be growing now, and it's free. It's a wonderful resource. So I like that to answer the questions. When it comes to the question of what can I plant fruit and vegetable wise, like how do I get a good continuous supply of fruit from fruit trees and berries and such, there's a couple of really nice websites from garden centres. Incredible Edibles is one that's got some really nice resources for the seasonality and when things, the harvest season of those, of different plants. I also, and I know in the North Island, there's a couple of places, Edible Garden sells fruit trees for the North Island, and there's other nurseries in the South Island that we've had recommended in the past, but I'm from the North, so I don't know them well enough. When you go to a nursery that's in your local area, they have the best knowledge for what can grow in your climate. So I would not be well placed to advise somebody from Canterbury what to grow, because I'm pretty sure it's too cold for citrus and feijoas in the South Island, but I'm not really, and I think you can grow cherries and apricots, but that's kind of, there will be some experts in your area, and those experts are typically the nurseries that have the plants. So my advice for people when they're asking, what can I grow in my region to make sure I've got continuous supply, is really check out the harvesting period from the nurseries. Have a look at usually it's on their price list, or they might have it on their resources page. And that will really give you a chance to plan it out so that you're looking at which crops grow when. And the other thing to do is check out your local community gardens and your friends' places that have trees. I always like the idea that if you see something growing well near you, that's the one to try and grow at your place. That's a tree that's already proven that it grows well in your area, and so and in your soil type and in your climate. So I'm a big fan of using those powers of observation and making friends with people and talking to them. Oh, I've noticed you've got the most glorious orange tree. Do you happen to know the name of it? Where did you get it from? That sort of thing. It's about kind of building that community and connection there. All right, so there's another question. Next slide, please. All right, so I have been leaving the weed management until last in the previous slides. I'm bringing it up early because it's such an important aspect for landowners when they've got something that's a real problem. So the photo on this is asparagus weed, or sometimes called asparagus fern. It's a weed. It spreads through tubers and little red berries. It absolutely smothers the undergrowth. I'm pretty sure it's just a North Island problem. I don't think I think it's like Auckland, Northland, and this on Waiheke Island as well, and I think Coromandel. So that kind of almost subtropical region. The birds spread it, and that's one of the biggest problems with it. So you can completely eradicate it from your island, and it will come back because the birds are picking it up from somewhere else. So I'm pretty sure it grows rampant in the Waitakares, and birds flying around are going to keep bringing it back. The seeds don't last that long, so that's kind of a good thing. but the tubers really do. So what I've done when it comes to invasive weed management, this is different to just a general weed in your garden. Weed control in your garden, how do I get rid of kikuyu, for example, or how do I deal with creeping buttercup in my veggie patch? Those are different management issues to the kind of scale and invasiveness of different types of weeds, things like convolvulus, and obviously this asparagus. One of the best websites that I like for New Zealand is Weed Busters, and that's what I've linked to at the top, weedbusters.co.nz, or is it .org? It's .org.nz, because it's an official government website with advice collated from all the different councils and how they look after it. So invasive weed management tends to be a council level thing rather than an individual sort of backyard thing. If you are organic and you want to control invasive weeds, you've got a really steep uphill battle, because these things are hard to control even if you're using chemicals against them. I do not advocate for the use of glyphosate or weed spray at any time. I definitely value organics. Having said that, sometimes I feel like for the greater good, intensively or targeting glyphosate against a very problematic weed for a couple of years so that you can establish undergrowth and bush regeneration, it seems like it might be worth it, because long term the bush and the natural systems in the bush are going to recover from that sort of chemical application. When it's applied in food, we don't have that same restorative ability of the land. We've got bare land and we've got a crop, and we might spray, they'll spray it, and then that continuous cycle, and it's forever, because it's endless, because it's the management tool for vegetables. That's a completely different sort of basket to invasive weed management. So if you've got any invasive weed, and asparagus is one of these, the advice on Weed Busters tells you normally the cultural control, which is how do I, what part of it is going to regrow, what do I do with the bits that I dig out. One of the things that it says is you'll need to dig out all of the tubers, but if you've got just leaves, that can be left to rot. That's actually really important information, because some plants will regrow from fragments of a leaf or a branch that gets left lying around. So they're really good at telling you what part of the plant is really problematic and likely to grow. But one thing that you are always going to get on Weed Busters is a recommendation of which chemical to apply. If you don't want to do that and you don't want to go down the chemical avenue, then it's just a lot more work in the getting rid of stage. So be prepared to put in that effort, and depending on the scale of the problem, that might be fine. You can eradicate it from a small patch where you're just continuing getting on top of it. You recognize that you've got to get those tubers out. You're looking to see that the birds aren't spreading more seeds, and you're pulling out the seedlings really quickly. If that's the case, then you can probably manage a smaller space without any chemicals. So that's, and then the final piece of advice on the what can I do to stop it coming back is replant and get really dense ground cover, and get that really dense ground cover of native plants established, and then the reinvasion is much less likely. So it's a sort of a 3-step approach, and once you get to that, then it's less likely to come back. All right, so that's invasive weed management. You're focusing on asparagus, that's the website that I go to for the best advice. Sometimes I'll ignore the chemical advice, but it's certainly a good avenue. All right, so we're getting back to vegetables, because I didn't want to I didn't want to forget and leave the the weeds till the last. All right, so one of the questions is, what can I grow when there's low light in winter? And this is really important to know, because winter is low light anyway. It's part of the definition of winter. All plants need, and all the vegetables need, at least 6 hours of sunlight a day in order to grow. If they get less than that, they're just going to, like the frost, they're just going to kind of stagnate. 8 hours of light is ideal. And if you have a garden that's only getting morning sun in the winter, there is no way you're going to get big enough growth. And I have literally seen gardens where there was shade in the morning from a tree on half the garden, and then the rest of the garden was in the sun. And you could draw a graph. You could draw a graph of the trees in the shade. The most shade is small, and the ones in the sun are big. That's what you're getting. It's a lot of work to have a winter garden in the shade, for no reward. You might be better off leaving that whole garden what we call fallow, or applying mulch, or doing a lasagna garden there, which I've got a slide for to show you in a little bit, and actually don't have any vegetables growing there, because without the sun you're not going to get growth. It's easier to put summer gardens in a part shade, so maybe it doesn't get morning sun or it doesn't get afternoon sun, because there's something like 16 hours of sunlight, or at least 12 hours of sunlight in a summer's day. And that means that you've got the ability to have only half-day sun, because those days are longer. So if that makes sense, the most important thing is making sure that winter garden has enough sun. And if you can't do that, maybe the winter gardening's not for you. And so I've actually got some suggestions, and I'm not trying to be facetious here, but if you don't have enough sun in your garden to grow a good winter garden, don't waste your time trying it. You could look for sprouting, so seed sprouting on a windowsill, because they don't need any light to germinate seeds. And you can look at foraging for edible weeds. And I really actually advocate for this. I eat weeds just about daily. I don't call them weeds so much anymore. I call them edible wild plants. And I forage for them in my backyard. I know which ones, and I can sometimes deliberately plant plantains or something that I know that is really nice and tasty. So they will be there in the winter growing, regardless of the light. They're very, very tough. So Julia's Edible Weeds is a website that you can download her ebook, full color pictures, lots of details. Follow her blog, like her on Facebook, and get lots more information about the kinds of things that you can be eating in winter. And some of the winter weeds are my favorites. I mean, I like chickweed better than lettuce. It's a really tasty plant, and it's free, and it's growing right now. All right, next slide, please. Okay, actually, before we go on to the next slide, do we have any questions on the seasons and the weed management? All right, that's cool. All right, we'll keep rolling. So next block of questions is on soils and compost. So questions like, what should I be doing through the winter to help support good vegetable growth? My herb garden needs either re-sowing or good nutrition. There's a forage garden. They're looking at winter soil preparation and planting for spring. So how do we prepare it? So these are quite similar. And then we get to how do you make your own compost, and how to use a wormery, and what kind of mulch combinations. And I think there was one, anyway. So rejuvenating soil. So organic matter is the answer to everything. Every sort of really, it's the first answer that you should be looking at, especially in New Zealand. Our topsoil is not that deep. Our organic matter levels are typically quite low, with our volcanic sandy soil with bedrock underneath, if you look at the sort of geology of New Zealand and its history. it's not, even though we've been forested for millennia, it's not the kind of climate or soil type that builds up really deep topsoil. So we need to be doing that. And organic matter is anything that was alive but is now dead. So that's just something, anything is the goal. We need more organic matter. Don't need to be too scientific about it. Get anything you can get your hands on. The only caveat to that sort of caution is most people are even a little bit slightly aware that some things are more dry, carbon based, and some things are more wet, and we've heard that maybe that's nitrogen based. And then just the fact that you don't really understand what is carbon and what is nitrogen might make you go, oh, this is too hard. So I really hope to sort of get you past that. Typically, if it's actively rotting, then it's quite high in nitrogen. If it's a sort of thing that is dry and won't rot very quickly, newspaper, cardboard, sawdust, that sort of thing, that's a sign that it's much more carbon based. Everything's got both in it. If it was alive and is now dead, it's got a little bit of both. So the main thing is to have a balance of those. So if you're constantly adding food scraps, you'll want to add some newspaper and cardboard just to balance. It's almost like soaking up the moisture. So you don't even really need to think about carbon, nitrogen. You can think about wet and dry, and that actually works quite nicely for most things. Just make sure it's not too slimy and not too dry so it can't break down. And this is how we make a compost, add things to a worm bin. It's all the same theory, because we're taking what was alive and is now dead, and we're turning it into organic matter, humus, topsoil, vermicast, compost. Basically all words for the same stuff, that good organic matter that you want in the soil. So I've made a link there to the Hills Laboratory crop guides, and I've done that because the Hills Laboratory is one of the places where you do soil testing if you want to know. I mean, this is professional soil testing for orchardists and agricultural land in commercial production. Typically you can get soil testing if you bought a lifestyle block and you wanted to know its past use, whether there was any toxicity there. You could get those sorts of tests, but typically you don't need to, in a home garden, pay for a chemical analysis of your soil. But what you can do is you can use their resources where they've got these crop guides. So say you wanted to grow blueberries or cabbages or garlic or whatever your tree is, they will have a guide on the website for that crop, and it will tell you what kind of typical soil it needs, what kind of deficiencies they tend to get, what they like best, what that crop grows best in. And then you can make some small changes to maybe, so say you start with that second bullet point with all the stuff, coffee grinds, newspaper, seaweed, all the things, and then you go to the Hills Lab and you say, oh, this plant typically suffers from calcium deficiency, because they'll have the key deficiencies that they're prone to. Well, then you might think, okay, well, I just need to add a little bit of calcium to my mix. And it's as simple as that. To really get you good balance, this is how we do it. So I'm pretty sure one of the questions was, what is an easy way to tell the pH of, so that's the acidity, alkalinity of the soil. You can buy quite good pH tests from the garden centres, the likes of Mitre 10. Garden centres will have these little kits. I would advise you not to waste your money on any kit that says that it's going to test the nitrogen or the NPK or anything like that in the soil. You actually need a proper lab to do those tests. Those cheap kits that say that they test those, I've never found them to be successful. But the pH is a pretty simple test, and you can get even pH strips if you know how to use them. But the ones that you buy, you get the little soil sample, you shake it up, the instructions are really clear. We do it in the soils days, and one kit does at least sort of 20 tests, so you can sort of keep testing it over time. But just even having a result is kind of meaningless if you don't know how to address that imbalance. We cover soils for 4 days in the Gardening Essentials course. We've got a day on the chemistry, fertility, the structure and texture of soil, and then a huge amount on the biology of soil and really bringing it to life. So this is kind of in a nutshell what you add to bring up a garden to speed. Let's look at the next slide. Okay. If you've got a garden that you're kind of retrofitting, if that's the right sort of term for a garden. It's already planted, it's an established garden, and you're wanting to get some fertility in. This happens in orchards or around fruit trees. Putting your mulches and organic matter on top is perfect. This is how the natural system works. Most trees have feeder roots that come up and they're sort of near the surface. You've got worm activity right there and all those other bugs right there at the surface in that topsoil layer, and they will easily take whatever you spread on the top and work it down to where the plant needs it, which actually isn't as far as you think. You know, the plant roots might go deep, but their feeder roots are quite high. So say you've got a garden with shrubs, but you sort of have maybe you've got a mixed garden where you've got trees and shrubs and vegetables or herbs. The best thing to do is just layer it on top, and then you're planting the herbs really in that top layer. You only need to work it in about 10 centimeters down if you're doing any work yourself, or you could leave it spread on top. The paper, cardboard, newspaper layer that goes down on the bottom of a lasagna garden is the weed smothering. Yep, no, the next slide's fine. It's the weed smothering layer. So this is how you would take, this is the beginning of establishing a new vegetable garden on lawn. And the same principle can apply if you're trying to mulch around a tree. So if it's got weeds around it that you want to smother, you could be putting a layer of cardboard down first. The only caution for that is I wouldn't do cardboard for 100% of around where that root zone is, because if it's dry, the cardboard's actually going to stop that plant from getting water penetrating through. So maybe a thin layer of newspaper, and that just stops it sort of kills the weeds. The mulch sits on top, the newspaper rots quite quickly, the weeds are already pretty much dead, the seeds don't grow, and the mulch can then be incorporated into the soil. So depending on your plant, that will depend on the thickness of that bottom layer, because it works as a weed mat, but it also can dry out your trees a little bit too much. But yeah, if you've got a garden and you're wanting to refresh it, I'm not a big fan of digging. I'm not a big fan of double digging or bringing stuff up or mixing it. You're not a cake mixer in the garden. You want to just spread stuff over the top and trust that the biology is going to mix that down where the vegetables and stuff will need it. So what we do is we're just like, right, over the grass, you put some paper, you might water it in, you're going to add some more shredded leaves and stuff like that. You'll add some really green stuff. Maybe it's grass clippings, maybe it's fresh seaweed, maybe that's where you put your banana skins, and then you just keep layering it for as much as you've got, and you can leave that. So back to my earlier comments about gardening in winter and how much sun that garden needs. If you've got a garden patch, you're like, oh, that means I can't really grow cabbages there. Maybe the best thing to do is lasagna it up. It's kind of fallow, and that will rot down slowly. And by the time it comes to spring planting, you will have the most gorgeous, luxury bedding area to put spring planting for summer crops, because maybe that garden gets 6 to 8 hours in the summertime, but it doesn't in the winter. All right, do we have any questions about that stuff? Anybody's? Deborah, you're muted, so I don't know if you're there.
Yeah, I'm just unmuting. Sorry, it just flashed down under. Sharon, did you have a question from last time?
Yes, I did, about leaves. I said the best
Oh,
you
yes.
could do for your garden was leaves,
Yes,
but I
that's
wasn't
right.
sure how to use them. I collected leaves, but I don't know what to do with them.
Ha! All
Mulch
right,
them,
brilliant.
Or do I compost, or...
Okay, I use leaves in the winter just straight on the garden as mulch, and it just looks like nothing's happening. But if you ever sort of peel it back, it's damp underneath. They start breaking up. The bugs are coming and getting them. They never eat the top layer of leaves. It stays there until forever. But the underneath layers are sort of chewed up. So there's a number of things you can do with leaves. You can put them in a big barrel-y container and just wait for that to compost down. The leaf mold, the mulch that makes is really beautiful, and you apply that to the garden in spring, it'll compost down. You can put it through, and I know some people, their leaf blower is also a sucker mulching thing. So if you've got a sucker, it'll shred it up, and that makes that breaking down faster. And then you can apply it underneath. I'll put it around fruit trees, for example, and make a really nice weed matty type layer around the fruit trees. You could also run over it with your mower a few times. So you could put the leaves on your lawn and then mow it. And if you've got a catcher, that's great. If you don't have a catcher, you could still maybe scrape it up at the end. But literally, that's one way of like getting the machinery to get those leaves and get them smaller. I've got big like plane tree leaves, like huge things. If your leaves are already small, then that's not important. So use them directly as a mulch, or chuck them in your worm bin and use them as the dry sort of bedding material for that. Or shred it up and then apply it as mulch, and that'll break down a little bit faster. Or put it in a barrel and wait for it to rot down, just the leaves. One of the things about a compost made from leaves, it's a cold compost, not a hot compost. But it doesn't matter that it's a cold compost because there's no weed seeds in there. Autumn leaves don't have any contaminants, and so it's a very fungally based, insect driven, chewed up and pooped out compost, compared to hot composts tend to be quite bacterially dominant, because it's the hot and the combustion that's breaking it down really fast. That's more of a quick digestion. Doesn't really matter in the grand scheme of things, but just know that it's a really nice product at the end of it that's completely weed free, and you can chuck that around anything you like, fruit trees or vegetable gardens later. So yeah, I think they're great because they really do act as a good weed mat through the winter months. Yeah, insulating and feeding the worms and giving them a habitat.
Okay.
All right.
One more question, Hazel, sorry.
Yeah.
You mentioned kaikui and buttercup around your veggie gardens and stuff when you were doing weed management. Would you like to discuss that a little bit more?
Expand on kaikui and buttercup. Yeah, it's one of those things that those weeds, there are strategies where it comes to hand weeding them out, creating barriers around your garden so that they can't come back in. And so you might dig a trench, take out the topsoil layer, put that on your vegetable garden, don't waste it, and then fill the trench with really dry sawdust, making a nice kind of pathway. And then the kikuyu can't really cross through that barrier easily to get into your veggie garden. So once you've eradicated it, it kind of stays out. And that's where that persistence, being on top of it, weeding it out, making sure that you get every little last piece of it. And with buttercup, making sure your drainage is good and making sure the pH is a little bit higher, because they do prefer an acid soil. So there's a couple of tips and tricks to how you remove them. And never ever, if you've got buttercup and kikuyu in your garden, never ever just churn it all over. That's not how you deal with it. You don't dig it up and turn it over, because all you're doing is spreading it right through the whole thing. So it's those ways of understanding what that weed is, where it grows from, knowing that you've got to be onto it all the time. But because it's your vegetable garden, it's got a sort of a set area, and you can maintain that quite well. Once you've eradicated it, it stays gone. When you've got something as vast as a bank of asparagus, that's a whole other system and intensity of work to deal with, and the rewards of what I prefer when it comes to going back to the invasive weeds, because I made that comparison with an invasive weed problem. You want to hit it hard for a couple of years, be really intensive, clear it out, get rid of it, replant, and then you should be able to sort of step back and go, I did it. Now it's just kind of a little bit of maintenance. It can be quite similar with a veggie garden, but it's much easier just to do a method like a lasagna garden. So say you started with a garden, or you're replenishing a garden, now would be a good time. So say you had a garden that has buttercup and kikuyu. Let's do that lasagna garden, put some thick layers of cardboard down, smother the whole thing, because you can do that because it's just a veggie patch. Put all your mulch and layer on, and then in spring you can be planting in there. Most of the kikuyu will be already gone or weakened. The buttercup will be the same, and the little pockets that survived and try and come up through, you can hand weed those out. It's much harder to do that strategy down an enormous sort of restoration bank, and especially once you start planting other trees and stuff through it. So getting the invasive weeds gone first. And so I guess it's the same kind of principle, but it's just the scale of the thing, really. So just a couple of little pointers there. Understanding how the weed operates.
Sorry, can I ask, with the doing the lasagna garden, I can see if you're starting fresh, that's the way to go. Is there a big difference between, how you've got the browns and greens layers? I mean, that's what we would do with our compost bin, do a mix like that. So, I mean, pros and cons of doing it in the garden compared with in the compost bin?
Right. So the benefit of doing it in the garden is that you're using it as weed management, and you're feeding the soil. So if you've got weed problems, or a garden that's needs rejuvenation, if you're doing it in a compost bin, you're making a hot compost, and then you've got to move it. You've got to dig that hot compost up, and you've got to put it on your veggie garden. So there's an extra step there of getting it from A to B.
Right. Yeah.
Depending on what you're making that hot compost out of, if it's filled with weed seeds, you really need it to hot compost. You wouldn't be applying weeds as part of your green layer on the lasagna, because that's going to just introduce weed seeds to your lasagna garden. So lasagna gardening is not hot. It's not going to kill or activate, those weed seeds. So you've got to be careful with the material, but it's a way of dealing with the weed. You're going to save yourself from having to weed. You're feeding the worms and the soil life in the spot, but you can't garden in it straight away. So it's a kind of that fallow year, or you've got, maybe it's a summer garden and you're not growing anything in the winter. It's that kind of empty patch. Having said that, I do sometimes, like, I might just do a little like lasagna mound, one cardboard box, one bit of grass clippings and leaves in a spot, and I've still got cabbages or whatever next to it, and so it's only a part of the garden that I've got fallow rather than the whole thing. So again, that sense of scale, how big is it? But
how long does it take in the garden? Is it 3 months or?
Yeah, that seems about right. Yeah. Sometimes you go back and the compost hasn't done, like the cardboard hasn't broken down. Particularly if it's a really dry season, you might find that cardboard is just the same as it was, and you might just take the cardboard out. Then it's done its job. It's killed the weeds underneath. You don't need the cardboard there. It's not particularly part of it, and you can still. I've seen lasagna gardens where they've made them, broken a hole in it, and planted straight away.
All right.
No reason why you can't do that too. depending on the crop that you're growing, it can be very quick. But if you've got, you know, right now, if I've got a garden that I don't, it's going to be my tomato bed. I'm not putting tomatoes in until September, October. If I've got frost, then I want to get my seedlings up in a greenhouse early. So I might be thinking August, I might be thinking, oh, seed raising, which seems too cold for doing anything outside, but it might be a good time for seed raising. I'll have a proper little seedling of pumpkins and tomatoes maybe really early, and that can go out into the garden in September. So where are we now? May, June, July, August. That's a good 3 months. That garden's just growing weeds. It's growing dock right now, probably. So I'm better off not letting the dock get established, chucking the cardboard down, and I can always scrape it back later. But in the meantime, so here's the problem with a bare soil garden. So you could weed it and you could just leave it empty. It's dying. It's getting frosted, that top layer is cooking, and all the bacteria that lives in the soil is dying. The worms have gone down deep. They don't like to be exposed. You're losing nitrogen from that soil, and when you lose nitrogen from the soil, that means you're losing topsoil. So when you've got a garden that you've weeded and you're just leaving it fallow in that way that you're just leaving soil, the longer you leave soil, the more your topsoil is actually being eaten by the bugs that live in it, and it's disappearing. Maybe not that dramatically, but this is the principle where if you want to leave a garden with no weeds, but nothing's growing in it yet because you're waiting, cover it with something. Cover it with leaves, cover it with something. You've got to feed the stuff that's in there. They need food too. Mm. So yeah, that's the principles behind why you're covering it with something and not just, you know, why don't I just leave it empty? Yeah, because the weeds are going to grow anyway. All right, so should we move on?
Asked, can she use the dead wood from borer of her mandarin tree? So it must be bored wood at the bottom layer of a veggie garden. She's only been
absolutely. Absolutely. And like if you've got a chipper and you're taking something, so borer isn't going to affect your veggies and you've killed it anyway, you've chopped it out, it's dead. That'd be great. Wood, mulch from one. I would even take your bored citrus wood and put it under a different type of fruit tree that doesn't get borer. That's totally fine. Yeah. Yeah. These are not, when we do the diseases class, we cover the concepts of which diseases are so problematic that you have to slash and burn and completely get rid of that plant material so as not to spread it, and which parts are totally fine to really use again somewhere else. I think that's a really important learning that we cover in the pests and in the diseases class. Okay. So, all right, so the next question, it's a whole bunch of questions, and this is kind of new. We haven't been getting these until just recently. I really want to address them because it's almost that extra for experts type stuff. We've covered, you know, what do I plant and when do I plant it, and now it's really this: what is permaculture? What is permaculture and how do I make the most of that? So there's questions about how do you start permaculture when you're a beginner? How do you do small scale permaculture on a rented property? And there was a couple of those. How do I make a permaculture garden I can take with me at the end of my tenancy? Other people looking at they didn't call it permaculture, but they got sort of 6 beds and looking at how do I manage crop rotation, I guess, or managing the main veggie beds. How do I work a garden which is able to produce everything I need from compost to mulch? Where do I start? And I'm like, where do I start as well? So we're all like, whoa, that's a big question. But you got to start somewhere, right? And wanting to know more about permaculture, what is it and how do we go about getting it started from a small kitchen garden to bigger scale? And I think the answer is in that way, is in the question. So these are some big concepts. We're going from like what even is permaculture to how do I apply it and how do I become really ultimately self-sufficient. The concept of permaculture comes from the words permanent and culture. So it's about sustainability. It's about the ability for humans to grow and be sustainable over a really long scale. You're looking at that 100-year scale of gardening rather than a 5 or 10-year scale, which is typical to production. Permaculture has a lot of principles and ideas that help it to work. And so one of the key concepts I think that I'd like to introduce you to, if they're like, where do I start? Where do I start is great. The first starting point would be zones. And so understanding your zones can help you make a garden that's more efficient. So one of the sort of, for something to be sustainable, it needs to be efficient. It needs to be sort of self-supporting, and it needs to be something that you're going to do for a long time. Understanding zones helps you with that. So zone 0 might be your house, and there's some concepts that zone 0 is your inner thinking. Zone 0 might be inside your house. Zone 1 is typically just outside the house. It's the stuff that you visit every single day. Typically, it's your herb garden that's right outside by your doorstep. So Bill Mollison, I think, said you want to be able to make an omelette without putting on your slippers or without getting your slippers wet. So you want to be able to just pop outside, get the herbs that you need to make your omelette without having to go too far. So that's considered really zone 1, really close by the house. Zone 2 are the things that you might visit a little bit more frequently. Typically it's your vegetable garden, or it's your worm bin, or if you've got chickens, it'll be in the spaces where you visit really often. Zone 3 tends to be fruit trees, so you're still visiting them regularly, but not nearly as regularly as your herbs and your veggies. And then we get into the wild zones, the stuff where you might forage for firewood, and for people with really small gardens or backyards, city, urban dwellers, you might not have a zone 3 even. The whole thing is zone 1 and 2 because you can visit the whole garden every day. You can still have fruit trees in it, but you're visiting it really frequently. So if you've got a small space and you're visiting everything really frequently, the reason I bring up the zones, and I think that it's really important, it's a way of ordering what's important to me, what am I going to visit most often, what do I need most often, and we start with the things that you really need, especially as this applies to the questions of how do I take this with me. So if you've got a rental garden and you're wanting, should I grow my vegetables in a bag and then can I, and trees in a bag and then can I take them with me? One of the things with zones is if you're in a smaller space, your zone will include potentially the park, the community garden, the school garden that might be near you. So if you don't have an orchard or space for an orchard, I would be saying permaculture is looking for, you have to decide what are your zones, and it's not just your house and your backyard and then your pond. It's looking at where is my access to resources and where else can I get this from? So I'll park that thought for a bit and I'll come back to it. Multifunction is a permaculture concept where we analyze a tree and we say, what are the resources you can get from this tree? Obviously it's a fruit tree, so we're going to get fruit, but there's flowers, and that's going to provide pollen and nectar for bees. There's leaves, and if it's a deciduous tree, those leaves are a resource for my compost heap or for mulching. It's providing shade, which I like to sit under, and maybe I can put a swing in it for the children. It's attracting birds. So we're looking at all of these stacking functions of the tree. What else is it good for? So if you've got a concept of where do I start, you want to be looking at everything and analyzing, is this just one function? Does this have beauty, sort of aesthetic value to me? What other part of this plant can I eat? Am I just eating the leaves of the broccoli? Sorry, am I just eating the heart of the broccoli, or can I eat the leaves as well? Is the broccoli plant able to provide some shade or a bit of habitat for something else that I can grow as a companion to it? Does this all kind of make sense? So we've got even something as simple as you thinking, I want broccoli because I want to eat the broccoli. What else can I do with this broccoli? Can I share it with my neighbors and swap it for some apples? If my zone isn't big enough for me to have an apple tree, is there someone else who can grow apples that wants what I'm producing? If I've got a permaculture garden, but it's just small and I'm renting and I kind of have a need to take it with me, permaculture also has a human aspect. There's the earth care, people care, and sharing is a part of the permaculture principles. So we would be really wanting to encourage you to look at your reason for being. If you've asked the question, how do I get a garden that I can take with me? I'd be wanting to encourage you to go back, and we call that like going way back, which is really, why do you want to take this garden with you? Permaculture is about sharing as well. And when I was flatting, and I spent a good many years flatting, I lived in about 20 different houses when I was a student and in my younger years. And I tell you, I never rented a property with a lemon tree or a feed jar, and it did my head in, because I was like, it's a human right to live in a house with a lemon tree and a feed jar. And they're about $15 each at the garden centres, and even on my poor student budget, I valued that enough that I planted it everywhere I went. I never got a harvest from the trees where I lived, but I know that I was leaving a legacy for the next people. That's kind of, to me, that's permaculture. Before I even knew the concept of permaculture, that was me kind of leaving. I was like, every garden should have these. The landlord hasn't done it. I'm going to do it. The next person will be grateful, and they will get the lemons and the feed jars, and hopefully they'll share it with other people. And then as I got older and I started buying my home, I managed to move into a property that had a lemon tree and a feed jar tree, and that was like the only thing that it had on the property. And I was like, well, somebody did that for me, that's nice. And so permaculture can be not just thinking what you're going to take with you, but what you can create. If you're transient, if you're moving around from property to property and you don't own it, but you're going to stay in the same area, I would be encouraging you to join a community garden or a school, and helping establish a garden in the school, because that's something that's permanent. Even though you're moving, the garden is staying there, and it's building a community that can support each other. And then going to that question of how do I start and develop a garden from small scale to fully self-sufficient, that's how you do it. You start from small scale and you build it up step by step. You make slow changes, you analyze, you sit, you do my course, you come and join us and you learn everything you can about building soil and how to get those trees in and how to graft and how to take cuttings. And you make those small gradual changes to make sure that your energy keeps up with what you're growing, so you can maintain it, and you expand the garden over time as you develop those skills. We'll teach you how to make compost, we'll teach you how to look after your worm bin, we'll teach you how to make compost tea out of green stuff and aerate it and spread it around. So slow and steady would be my answer. No, so Catherine, I mean, I'm the garden teacher and Catherine is the permaculture tutor, so I'd really like to invite you to add anything you want to what I've been saying. Like, how does this conversation feel for you there? Did I do okay?
Well, what we do here is, I came from San Francisco and I knew nothing about anything. So when my husband wanted to move to 10 acres, so we had more resiliency, I started learning things and did horticulture and propagation and lifestyle block. And then I bumped into permaculture. They were teaching up in Auckland. So Neville and I, every month for a year, we went up to Auckland to learn permaculture. And then when we got back here, I started looking up permaculture people in the area, and I found there had been a group 20 years before, but they had all moved away. So that was the impetus for starting Plenty Permaculture. And we started with a year-long permaculture program where we bring in permaculture experts from all over the country, and we just teach out of our little cottage here. So we've been doing that for 7 years. And this year we're taking a break because I want to restructure the permaculture program, and we're going to start again in April of 2021. And this also gives us a chance for Kazel and I to focus on the gardening essentials, because the permaculture course is 72 hours. We can't get to all the gardening skills that you want to get to really be resilient. So Kazel does 24 hours on soils, and in our permaculture course we can only do 6. So that's where we designed the 2 programs to dovetail each other, and we encourage people to do both. Permaculture is very big picture. It's very much about design, and like Kazel said, there's a whole lot about who's the person. You know, you'll hear a lot of times people buy a lifestyle block because they want to get out in the country, and then they end up selling it within a couple of years because it's too much work. And when I hear too much work, as a permaculture teacher, what I'm thinking is, insufficient design. So I'll leave it at that. I think we're going to talk a little bit later about some books, and I just grabbed a permaculture book that I would suggest to beginners.
Start with that now.
You want that now? Okay.
Yeah, because the next slide was my favorite book, and so if you've got your favorite book, that's perfect.
Okay.
Oh yes, that's my second favorite book.
Can you see that one? Okay. Your second favorite book. Okay. Well, this has been out for just a little while, and it's written by the co-founder of permaculture, the only one who's still living, and his name is, I think you can see it there, David Holmgren. So sorry, I'm having trouble orienting with the camera. So David wrote his original books on permaculture 40 years ago, but he came out with this, I think, in 2018 because he's still seeing the environmental degradation that's happening, and he still thinks there's a huge reason for people to be more resilient. And then looking out at all the cities we have, there's suburban neighborhoods all over the place. There's bricks and mortar, there's structure, there's things that are going to continue to exist even if the internet collapses and other things collapse. So this whole book is about how can you be more resilient if you live in the suburbs. So all these things Kazel's talking about, you know, cooperating with neighbors and community this and community, there's all sorts of things. And it's very much also based on a suburban size property. Very practical, very straightforward. So I highly recommend it. He just, because now of the whole COVID thing worldwide, he's got a lot more of it available online. There was a period where you could just buy it for donation. Tell you what, I'll find that link and we'll see if that's still active or not. Yeah, so you can get it online, and now they're starting groups that talk about it. So a real book for its time. That's why it's my favorite. Is that enough, Case?
Oh, that's awesome.
Okay.
That's really awesome. And yeah, I mean, I think that's the thing. Sometimes the question is, how do I grow a permaculture garden that I can take with me? If the question had been, how do I grow a garden that I can take with me? I would have answered it quite differently. I would have been talking about grow bags and things you can put in pots and things you can take. But the concept was a permaculture garden. And I'm like, hang on, permaculture isn't necessarily about what can I put in a pot and take with me? It's about what can I grow that I can share at a crop swap? Is there a crop swap near me? And if there's not, how do I start one? So it's a different way of thinking. So I really love that. So the next slide is my favorite book for permaculture, but it's actually one of my favorite books for gardening. This is Rosemary Morrow. She's another leader in permaculture, and the book's The Earth User's Guide to Permaculture. And one of the reasons I love this is because I've seen it in action. I've been teaching horticulture for a few years now, and I've had students come in who started by getting this book and following the advice and the guidelines in the book to create chicken domes or gardens using the kind of chicken dome structure and building compost and multi-stacking the vegetable gardens. And so when we went to visit the garden that had been grown prior to doing any course on gardening at all, bought the book, followed the ideas. This was the most glorious garden of vegetable production I think I'd seen from any student. And I was just like, you don't need me. This book is amazing. The fact that you followed this book, it's just incredible. So one of the reasons I like it is because really it works. I've seen it work. I've seen it work really, really well and be really, really productive and make the people who had the book really, really happy that they've done that. Okay.
All right. Can we talk about this part now?
Yeah.
Okay, great. So we've still got a couple more things to talk about, including some basics on pruning coming up in a minute. But I just wanted to take a couple of minutes to just say, Kaisel's course is coming up. We're starting next week, as a matter of fact. And I think you've had a chance to get a feel for how she rolls, how she shares. She always does a really great presentation. And it's always based on her knowledge and recent science and tempered by her experience as a gardener. So this is the list of the 17 courses that we're going to offer. And we've been teaching them out of our cottage here for the last year. But now we're making the jump to also offering it online. Because I get requests all the time from people in the South Island saying, oh, my friend says it's a really good course, but I can't participate. And I'm like, oh, sorry. So with the time we had in lockdown, we decided to make the jump. I video everything. So I've been videoing Kaisel for the last year and a half, and it's just sitting here, and we decided to take it and turn it into watchable courses and make it available online. So I'm having a huge learning curve learning how to do that. There's so much tech involved. It's amazing. If any of you are professional online class people, send me an email. I'll be happy to talk with you. Anyway, that's the list. And you know, Deborah, would you mind unmuting yourself? Deborah did the course last year. She's a neighbor of mine. And is there anything you would want to say to people about doing the course?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. So I can't talk highly enough about it. So anything that you want to know is in this course and more. And both these two ladies that are doing this Zoom thing now are just unbelievable in their knowledge and what they partake in, and their generosity of time and more. So if you're thinking about it, and at the prices that it is currently, which are just up, it's a no-brainer. Absolutely do it. Absolutely do it. So it's fantastic.
Yeah, because so many people want to get empowered, and a lot of that means be able to produce your own food. Again, I've been getting all these emails about how can I be more resilient. So Kaisel and I just looked at each other and said, okay, let's just start doing some free Q&A things. And that seems to be working well. And we thought, okay, if we can expand the number that we can share this course with using the internet, then we can bring all the prices down. So that's what we're doing. to reduce the risk for you guys, but also to just make it more available. And Kazel, she's our Facebook person, so she just created a giveaway. Do you want to say something about that?
Yeah. So Catherine and I would really like to offer placements on this course to worthy people. We generally take in interns that help us and support us and do like a work exchange. And because it's online, we can offer a place. It's not like you're taking a seat from somebody. So we've got a competition running on Facebook. So what I would encourage you to do, if you haven't already, is go to our Facebook page. It's Plenty Permaculture. Go to our Facebook page, find the post where it says that there's a giveaway, like the post, and nominate a friend, or ask your friend to nominate you back, and then say something about why they deserve to get a free placement. And we're going to choose someone from the list that we want to give the free membership to. Obviously, it's a promotion for us, so the more people like it and are tagged in it, the better, to get that information out there. Because one of the ways, if you like what we do, one of the ways you can support us is by sharing it. We need it needs to be sustainable, and that means it needs to pay its way. There's costs to running it, there's costs to our time, even just the Wi-Fi expense. So we need to get that back. And so you can support its existence by entering to win a free enrollment, which is pretty exciting.
The last thing I'll say, I'm learning how to write about this course now, because there's a face-to-face version and there's an online version. And I'm getting more questions. I see my writing isn't quite up to snuff. So basically the way it'll work is a week before the session, you'll get an email, and that'll be things that would be great for you to watch ahead of time or read ahead of time. Kazel looks at the internet to see what's good and of quality out there, and will suggest those ahead of time. Those, you can make a copy of that. You can look at it at any time. So if you're busy before the course, save it and you can get to it later. But if you do have time, it just starts to get you introduced to the topic and the language around the topic. Then 2 days before the actual course, I'll send you another email, and that's got the link for Kazel's presentation on video, which I've edited in her presentation in PDF. And those typically run 2 hours. The seed saving one that's coming up is 2 hours and 20 minutes. So then you can see Kazel's presentation on the topic. You'll also get a link for the handout so that you can print that out yourself and take notes on it. You'll also get a link for the interactive session, and that happens on the Saturday. So for those of you who live far away, you'll get on the internet with Kazel at 9:30 and have an interactive back and forth with her, say for about 2 hours. Meanwhile, I'm in the lounge with all the people who despise Wi-Fi, and we're watching the video presentation together. And then about lunchtime, Kazel will, say goodbye to all the online folks, come out, we'll have lunch, and then she'll do an interactive with them. So if there's a particular skill, we'll have it all set up for her to show them face to face. So that's how we're doing it for now. And we're learning as we go. So we may find ways to make it more efficient, but that's sort of how it's going to roll. And all the sessions, we work around holidays, we work around school, vacations, and we also work with the seasons. So when we do propagation of winter hardwoods, which is coming up at the end of June, you can then go out and find things to propagate right there on the spot. So we try to line up with the seasons as we go. I think that's good enough about the upcoming course.
Perfect.
Yeah? Okay.
That's perfect.
So how about the next slide? Or Deborah, do you have any questions that need to get attended to? Oh, I'm going to unmute you, Deborah.
Oh, sorry.
What was that?
One question from Amy, and she says our garden area in our rental is basically completely paved over. is the advice then to join a collective or a community garden and not to try and grow in pots?
Interesting. Okay, so the advice is a bit of both. Definitely grow stuff in pots, and I would, depending on how soon. Okay, I was renting. I had a balcony, like a second story house, and I was living on the balcony upstairs, but there was a lawn underneath that was kind of our property, but I didn't need to maintain it. And I wanted to grow vegetables because that's what I do. So what I did was I got some bags of compost and cheap potting mix, and I cut little holes in the bags. I think I poked some holes underneath them, and I put holes in the bags, and I grew tomatoes, beans, lettuce right there on the balcony in these ugly bags. And then when they were done, I just kind of tipped them over the deck, and they sort of smashed all over the lawn, and I spread them out, and then next thing you know, they're mowed, and you know, the landlord's none the wiser, essentially. So that is one very efficient system. If your whole property is kind of like paving stones, you can literally just grow stuff in these. You can buy grow bags now. I believe there's a whole lot of, there's systems where you can buy coconut fiber bags, and they swell up, and then you have to obviously feed them with like liquid fertilizer, but they last a lot longer. So that grow bag system is pretty cool, and it is something you can take with you. Deborah and Catherine, do you remember the name of that video? It was a movie, and it had the grow bags in it. It had the biochar.
Oh,
Reasonably recent. We'll think of that, see if we can see if it comes to you. But there was a documentary recently, and this guy was growing. He was market gardening on car park, asphalted car park, with these sort of compost in a tube systems, and growing vast quantities of food for restaurants and the city without ever touching soil, because he had compost in these grow bags. And so that is a system that I recommend. If you're trying to grow stuff in a pot, and then you're going to take the pot with you, I can tell you that's a lot of work, and it's a pain. I've done it for years because I'm garden obsessed, and I never want to do it again. I don't ever want to move plants in pots from one location to another. You can't stack them. It's not like a box. You can put one on top of the other. So if you're hiring, you know, you've got a trailer or something, you've only got one layer, you can never do at a time. And plants and pots, if you're trying to grow anything more permanent, like I've got a orange tree in a pot, and when I get to my final destination, I'll plant it. I tell you are better to buy a brand new orange tree and put it in the ground the day you move in, because that old one is now bonsai'd, pot bound, deficient, stunted, and it's going to take 3 years to recover in its new destination. Whereas if you just bought a new one on that day, you'd get it in. So if you think you're saving time by getting your plants now and then taking them with you, my experience is you're just setting yourself up for a lot of hard work. The things that you're going to grow in the pots and in the grow bags are your vegetables, herbs and vegetables, and think of them as quite almost disposable. But once the compost is emptied, you'll find people that will take it. People with another vegetable garden that's not your rental. They might, you know, the same way that people take horse poo and use it somewhere else. It's a resource, but it might not be a resource that you're going to take with you. So there's a two-prong approach. If you're wanting fruit trees, don't think about growing them in a pot in your rental property. I just think that that's do it if you like it, but not because you're intending to take it with you and plant it in a couple of years. Those are the situations where you might go to a community garden, and schools are great places to plant orchards, because you've got sort of generations of children growing up with those fruit trees that last a long time. Does that kind of help? So think about grow bags and temporary getting your veggies up, but not something that you're planning to carry and take with you to the next spot. Vegetables are fast. You can start again wherever you go. That's just my lived experience of being a gardener my whole life and realizing the folly of my ways. Yeah. Okay, do we have any more questions? I think we're going to be great. We've got looks like about 10-15 minutes left, and there's only sort of 2 more things that I'm covering today, so let's crack on.
Can I just ask one thing?
Yeah.
You were saying about the hot compost.
Mm.
I tend to avoid putting weeds in my compost, but you find that they do actually get killed in the compost at home, all right?
Yeah, if you're doing a proper hot compost, and by a proper hot compost, I'm talking about a big pile that, you know, you're testing with the temperature thermometer and it's getting to 60 degrees inside. You could basically boil an egg in there, and you're turning it appropriately before it shrinks down. And so you're going from a pile of weeds and organic matter that you've collected around the property to a pile of compost in about 3 months with heat. That's going to cook weed seeds. There's very little that I wouldn't put in a hot compost. I love a hot compost for destroying stuff, because what you get at the end looks nothing like what you put in. You know, that's the point. You can't recognize what it was.
Yeah.
You know, maybe you'll get an avocado stone that still needs to go through a second time, but there's very little that will be remaining. Yeah, so hot composting is. And then the other thing, there's weeds and there's weeds. Do you know what I mean? Like, so there's some things that I'm like, yeah, if you go to that invasive weed website and it's saying, you know, burn the tubers of this because you don't want them to spread, then don't even try and hot compost it. It's not worth the risk that you're going to then end up spreading it. But if it's weeds from your garden, they're already there anyway. It's not like you're introducing new stuff to your garden. And the kinds of weeds that you're coming from your vegetable garden and going back under, A, they're already there, and B, they're not that invasive, and you can just manage them. If they pop up, you'll be like, oh, well, I'll just pull those out again. It's, you know, just management. So yeah, hot composting is great for that. It's a lot of work though. I think hot composting often isn't done really, really well. And so it's not really true. It's more of a kind of a hybrid mulch pile worm bin but without worms kind of a system. And that's one of the things that we clearly cover how to do a hot compost in one of the soils classes. So we get some good instructions on making sure that really is a proper job. Neat. All right, so a couple of questions on trees. I'm just trying to find them on my. Yeah, so there was two questions in particular. One was a couple of citrus trees fruiting right now, and looking to like, how do I manage the winter care of foliage management of these citrus, and the fact that these citrus are quite dense right now, and they've got sooty mold growing on them, which is typical of citrus that's dense foliage. And then a question from Hamilton with an apple tree that's 30 years old. No one's looked at it for at least 20 years. It's got codling moth. It's such a big tree. She doesn't know what to do with it. And it's really hard for her to understand how to prune this tree when it's so high and it's so old. And looking at maybe planting new trees, but the codling moth issue just seems like it's insurmountable. So both of these questions quite specific about their cultivar. Yeah, and I want to give you all some help and pointers that's going to be useful too. So I'll just start with this diagram is one of my favorites. It's the pruning basics, and it's really, I do 2 workshops on pruning. I do a summer pruning, which we've just done, so it's mostly citrus, feijoas, and peaches, plums type pruning. And then we do a winter pruning, which is July, August, depths of winter, cold months, and that is apple trees, the deciduous pip fruit, apples, pears particularly. So now is not a good time to be pruning that apple tree. We're going to wait until it's really the depths of cold winter to do that. But you could be pruning the citrus, although they're both fruiting right now, which means it's sort of less good. The time to prune citrus, if you lived overseas, would be spring, kind of just before flowering. That's a terrible time for us to be pruning citrus in New Zealand, because we have the New Zealand borer, the lemonwood borer insect, which the adult is flying around in spring and summer, and it can smell when you've cut the tree, and it will go and find it and lay its eggs in there, and that's how you get borer. So because of that, we need to prune our citrus. Typically it's done around March, so just after the citrus borer has finished flying. But in March, you'll have a lot of immature fruit still developing on the tree, so we tend to cut fruit off as we're pruning our citrus. The alternative is to do like a winter prune in the citrus and make sure that those wounds have healed before sort of September, spring and budding up season. So we always kind of get it not quite at the right time. So if you've missed if you don't want to cut the fruit off and you've missed that March pruning, then the next thing to do is wait until the fruit comes off, but before it starts getting soft new growth. And yes, you want to remove a lot of the foliage. If it's with a citrus, if you've got a leaf basically underneath a leaf, or a whole bunch of leaves, you know, underneath another bunch of leaves, the underneath stuff is shaded, and it's going to get the sap dropping from the sucking insects. Citrus are prone to whitefly and scale in particular. And these are insects that suck under the leaf, and then they poop sugar, they poop the sap onto and it lands on the leaf below, and then that gets the black mold on it. So if the leaf below isn't below, if you've cut that off, then you're not going to get the sooty mold. Those leaves aren't doing much good to the tree anyway, because they are underneath, they're shaded, they're not really where the fruit is, and if there was any fruit there, it's going to be dirty. So try and open it up. The idea with a feed jar is they are pollinated by blackbirds, and so you want a blackbird to be able to fly through from branch to branch. But commercial feed jar growers say you want it to be so open and so expansive in there that a seagull could fly through it. So it's a kind of a similar concept to the citrus. You really want to open it up. You don't want it to look like a hedge and dense. You want it to look like, I always kind of think of high tea, those plates, those layered plates where you've got cupcakes and scones kind of layered on the plates. I want to see kind of layers in a tree, quite distinct with open spaces. So that's what I would recommend for the citrus, is wait till the fruit comes off, take off quite a bit, and whole branches. So you'll end up with a scaffold. You'll be choosing to thin the branches from the trunk rather than sort of taking off a bit of a branch here and a bit of a branch there. I think that's the cleanest way to do it. So this diagram is showing you're going to remove suckers from the rootstock. They've got to go. Anything that's broken has got to go. Anything that's kind of coming from the trunk and is going straight up has got to go. And if you've got a side branch that's got another branch coming straight up that, take off the really strong upright. And the other thing to remove is the double leader. You can do all of that, taking off the really obvious broken, too crowded, coming from the bottom, 2 leaders, too much vigorous upright growth. You can take off all of that without ever doing a pruning course. Then if you want some more detail about, you know, bending down the branches and replacement branches and how to deal with the central leader, that's when you come and do the pruning workshop days, because we just give you all that extra information. So the apple tree, 30-year-old apple tree, hasn't been pruned for 20 years. Probably all the fruit is up high. It's got coldlin moth. The coldlin moth is not a pruning issue. The coldlin moth is an insect issue, and you can deal with that by getting pheromone traps that you can buy in the garden centres. They come with like a little yellow triangle, and you put the pheromone in there. You need to understand when the moth is flying and deal with it at the right season. So I'll come to coldlin moth in a bit. But when it comes to that apple tree, start with these basics. Don't take off too much at once, because it's a gorgeous old apple tree. Now imagine that children want to climb in it, and have that as your goal. If it's so crowded that you can't get in there and you can't climb it to pick the apples, then you've got too many branches. So you can start with loppers and with a chainsaw. Just look at it and choose sort of the 8 to 10 branches that you're going to keep, that are evenly spaced all around, and then take out anything that isn't those branches. So you start there, and then you kind of step away from the tree and leave it for a year, because that could be a lot. So if it's really crowded, you could end up taking a whole lot away in that first year, and you don't want to overdo it. You might be taking off some pretty big branches. You want to obviously get some pruning skills, so that you're not, you know, look up, do the workshop with us, or look up pruning techniques, especially for those big cuts. So the nice thing about the apple tree, and if you're going to take off quite a lot, the timing of our course is set so that you can learn the skills on how to look at and examine and prune your apple tree, and then go outside and do it. And then you can send me some photos of what you did, or you can send me some photos of, well, here's the actual tree. Yeah, so it's Alicia in Hamilton. I don't know if she's here today, but you know, this is the kind of thing that you can do if you've got a specific tree. Do the workshop, then send me some photos and ask me some questions. And you know, I'm quite keen if you stick up a tripod and you're like, here I am, should I cut this one or this one? Like, that would be kind of fun. Let's do that, because it's a 30-year-old tree. We want to make sure it has its best chance. So the next slide is, oh,
sorry, I need to break in for just a second. It's 11 o'clock.
Yeah.
And we'll be happy to go a few minutes over, but in order to honor people's time, I'm going to put the poll up. It's anonymous, and if you wouldn't just mind letting us know how your audio was and all that kind of stuff, that'd be great. And you can not do it if you choose not to. And that's all I need to say on that. So Kazel, do you want the next slide?
Yeah, I'll do the next slide, and then I'll get some questions about that.
Okay.
Can I just say, sorry, one thing, just in case anyone's going. I've had someone asked where the face-to-face courses were. They're in the Bay of Plenty. They are in New Zealand, just in case that was not clear.
What do you mean? Do you think somebody thinks we're in America? What? Yeah, we're up at Whakamarama, just north of Tauranga. Thanks, Deborah.
Yeah. All right. So yeah, the last slide is I didn't chuck up a picture, but I'm just talking about coldlin moth. So coldlin moth and apples. I mean, it can really kind of ruin your experience of eating apples if you've got a lot. So we cover this in plant pests in quite detail, but this is kind of the thinking of how to deal with an insect pest that's problematic for your crop. You want to know the life cycle of the coldlin moth, and you really want to know which stages are the easiest to interrupt. Like, where is the control? Where do you apply, you know, whatever your control method is going to be? So with coldlin moth in particular, there's the caterpillar stage. It gets laid at the base of the tree, and then it crawls up the tree and finds the fruit, burrows into the fruit, and lives the rest of its life in the fruit. So there's a very vulnerable stage while it's coming up the trunk, and that's where we one of the sort of home remedies is wrapping greasy corrugated cardboard. I've seen sacking sort of soaked in turpentine and other kinds of remedies to the caterpillar kind of crawls up and gets stuck inside the corrugated cardboard, for example, and then you rip it off, And if you've used the greasy cardboard, you can chuck that to the chickens. If you've used sort of, I'm not even sure, sacking soaked in something, then you might want to dispose of that or dry it up for next year. So that's how you interrupt the caterpillar getting into the fruit in the first place. The second thing to do is to stop the moths from having sex. And that's quite easy to do, because we now know how to make the hormone that the female moths release to attract a male. And what you do is you release 10,000 times as much hormone as she does, and the male moths just can't even find her. For a start, they can't find her because there's hormone everywhere. And second, they will fly into your sticky trap and be killed. So it's working in two ways. It's interrupting and it's killing them. And there's a third method that I didn't put out, but it's using lights and like a light trap. I didn't put it in the thing because it's a little bit, you know, we've got electricity and lights and maybe kerosene killing them underneath. But there's ways that you can put, I mean, they're moths. They fly to light. You can kill both the males and the females just by having a zappy light somewhere outside at the season when they're flying and laying their eggs. And that tends to be really early in the season. This is kind of flowering time is the main control time for getting those hormones out, wrapping the corrugated iron cardboard around. So that's how you deal with codling moth. And then the next stage is getting rid of, if you see it in a fruit, you know, you can chuck that to the pigs, or you can pick it and bottle it, or make sure you kind of pick it up from underneath so that they don't hatch. Because if you can prevent them from completing their life cycle and hatching into a moth, then you can prevent them from laying more eggs. So that's that. And then the last point that I want to leave you with, the last piece of advice, nobody asked this question, but you should have, or maybe everybody knows this. In order to prevent the spread of peach brown rot, if you have a peach tree, I would like you to go outside and look at your peach tree, and you will find sort of withered up dead peaches sitting up on the branches. Pick them all off now and burn them or get rid of them. Those little dead brown mummified fruits are harboring the fungus that will spread in the spring and rot your peaches. And it's right up there in the tree where the peaches are, so you don't want that. So it's one of the easiest things that you can do if you've got a peach tree. Go in your garden now. It's not raining where I am. I don't know what it's like where you are. Go outside, look at your peach tree and your nectarines. It's the same thing. Pull off any dead fruit, and if you see broken, sort of died back branches, those branches are typically died back because the brown rot's gotten in there as well. So just a little bit with your secateurs. Don't get too carried away. We're just going to take off those mummies and snip off any dead branches that you find on a peach tree. And that will actually give you a better crop this coming summer. So there you go. That's the end of that. How'd we do? Yay! That's awesome. So Deborah, any questions there?
No more questions. No, I'm just double checking there's nothing I've missed.
That's awesome.
That's it.
So if anybody wants to unmute their mics and just sort of say hello or anything at all, quick sort of clarification, you know, we just got another minute or two. You've done the poll. We're really looking forward to seeing you, hopefully next week on seed saving. Yeah, otherwise, thank you. And I've really enjoyed your questions today. Were really challenging. I really enjoyed getting them all in. They're just getting better and better. This was the most fun, I think.
It looks like there's a couple questions, Hazel, so.
Yeah.
Christian, just thanks very much. All good.
Thank you so much.
It's Carolyn here. I'd like to say a special thank you to Deborah. She's been a great help answering lots of things I've thrown in her direction.
Excellent.
Oh, thanks, Carolyn. That's lovely. And seriously, if you are considering the course, do it, because the value for money is ridiculous. go for it. You will not be disappointed.
One of my
we learned doing these Zoom meetings that it's actually pretty good to have 3. So Kazel can simply present and she's not dealing with distracting questions. And Deborah's dealing with the questions. And a lot of them, she said she wanted to do the course again to keep learning more. And we're like, great, you can manage some of the questions. So that works well. And of course, I'm doing slides and admitting people and all that kind of stuff. So it looks like 3 makes this run pretty smoothly, I think. We'll check out your what you guys said in the poll. If you can think of better ways to do these, that would be great.
Carolyn again. I found that the prospect of the sessions being on a Saturday might be good for lots of people. But I work and I'm only attending this because I'm not working at the moment because of the COVID lockdown. So it's been great to join you today.
That's really nice that you can join. One of the things about the course, because it is running on the only thing running on the Saturday is the live Zoom getting your questions answered section. So you get to do all the pre-watching. You watch the class at your leisure, in the evenings when you're not working. You would miss the live Zoom session, but if you were enrolled, you would be able to access that video and see, I guess, what other people's questions are. And then I do have a lot of, we don't at this point have a lot of enrollment, so I'm still quite happy if you went through that system, watched the class, then watch the Zoom session of the questions with me, and then if you had something else that you really wanted to clarify, I can't see that's going to take more than 10 minutes of my time. I'm really happy to do that for people. So
Thank you.
If that time on a Saturday is the only barrier, I would urge you to just go ahead anyway and see if it works for you. At least try the first one and see how that system might roll for you.
Thank you.
Yeah, no worries. Because really fundamentally at the end of it, we're here to share this knowledge. This is our sort of reason for being, our ikigai, if you like.
Yvonne, did you have a question?
And now dwarf fruit trees, like dwarf apple trees, like do they need pruning at all? They don't seem to fruit very well in my garden. They did when I bought them at the garden center, but after that they just didn't do well.
Okay, so you're talking about like the ballerina, is the ones that fruit right off the trunk?
Yes, I am.
Yes.
Ballerinas.
Where do you live?
In Rotorua.
Sorry?
In Rotorua.
Rotorua. Okay, so it's quite cold. It can get quite cold. Are they getting frost? Or are they getting enough sun?
They are on the sunny side of the house, but there is a frost from time to time. Yes.
I mean, frost isn't too bad because it's a deciduous apple tree. The answer to your question is they're normally amazing.
Yeah.
I remember being very skeptical, like these things are gimmicks. Like, why does anybody want a stick of an apple that doesn't even have branches? You don't need to prune it. I couldn't understand it. And I've seen them so productive in people's small urban gardens, and you can have some 10 different cultivars in a really small space, and they seem to be, it's astounding how much fruit they can have off this one little stick, and they don't really need pruning, and they're cool. So I would be, I guess, a bit more patient. Maybe it's still just getting itself established. Maybe it needs a pollinizer, because apples need bees to go from one apple to another apple, and they need to be flowering at the same time. So if you've just got the one, or you've got two and they're the same plant, then you're going to have problems.
Different varieties. So they're next to one another in a row, but they're different ballerinas.
And so, all right, so that should be fine. And the next part of that is, if you don't have enough bees in your area, then you can be like if there's no hives around and maybe the bumblebees aren't around because it's really urban and built up, you can actually buy bumblebee hives and bring them in, or if it's just 2 ballerinas, you can use your finger or get a little paintbrush and just basically be the bee going from flower to flower, because it seems to me that those trees are actually really good. So maybe there's a pollination issue going on. That would be my next thing to look at.
Do they need other ballerinas to pollinate?
Do they? Sorry, say again?
Do they need other ballerinas to pollinate? Do they need
just another apple? It doesn't need to be another ballerina. It just needs to be another apple.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
I just wanted to show you. See, they're all on a row.
Oh, look at that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, they're good, healthy trees. They're really simple for a little urban space like that. Really, they're amazing.
Yes.
It's often the pollinizer, the pollinator. It might be the bees that you're missing, and there's ways to get around that.
Okay.
I mean, buying a bumblebee box, the place to go to, I think there's a couple of places, but the one that I always remember is Zonda, Zonda. And you can buy, they only last a year. The bees move out at the end of the year, but you buy this cardboard box. It comes with a queen bee and all that she needs to get established, and you'd be benefiting the whole neighborhood of fruit trees just by having the bumblebees if they're not in the area. Because one of the things pollinators need is wild spaces, and so the more built up a neighborhood is, sometimes it's just hard for them to get a toe in, so you could give them a hand that way.
Okay. All right.
And they're fun pets to have anyway.
Thank you. Thanks for your teachings. Very well done.
Thank you.
Okay, I think we're good. Thanks, everybody. It's been really nice to have you all here. And we have another Q&A session coming up the 4th of July, if you want to jump in with more questions. And otherwise, we hope to see some of you next weekend at the seed saving course. Anything else to say, Deborah or Kazel?
Oh, good. Thank you so much for coming.
See everybody.
All right. Bye.
Kazel, are you happy to hang on for a second?
Yeah, no worries.
Deborah, will you hang on for a second too?
Okay. End the recording.
Thanks.